Hello, I'm Faye.
And I'm Becki. In this podcast, we're going to be talking about maximising your potential as a leader and living your best life personally and professionally.
So join us on the M53 for our weekly chats, full of insights and inspiration, and of course, a cuppa and a butty.
Faye, it's called a brew.
Hello. In today's episode, it's just a little bit slightly different. I'm going to be interviewing Becki. Yes, get ready, Becki. So the reason that this came about, at the weekend, I was watching a bit of telly. My son was playing his computer games. My husband was off playing his guitar, and I got the TV on, and there was a programme, and it was 10 things that the Victorians did for us. Now that immediately interested me because I love history. So I'm like, I'll spend my time here for a bit. So I started watching, and no surprise at all, we were looking at, obviously, this country with Queen Victoria being head of the realm at that time, and we were looking, and it was looking at all the wonderful things, and it was a great time of advancement. There were lots of things that were going on, but one of the things that the programme talked about was the engineering that actually happened. Now, I lived just down the road from the Iron Bridge, so I'd grown up having, going to Iron Bridge as a town and, visiting the museums through school and through parents and whatnot. It was a place to go. But also I'd go down and see an aunt and uncle quite a lot when I was young, and they lived in Bristol, and they used to take us. I think it feels like every time we went to Bristol, we would go and see the SS Great Britain, and I'm sure that's not the case, but it felt like it. So I've always got this love of the SS Great Britain, because I always think, I saw that. I saw it when it was in ruins, really, and we watched it being rebuilt into how it is today. And I always really like sort of seeing it. And obviously Bristol has the Clifton Suspension Bridge and the greats of engineering. And it just got me thinking, because Becki's background is engineering, and I was thinking to myself, crikey, how does somebody go from a career in engineering, and Becki obviously being a woman in engineering, which in itself is a minority, how does somebody go from having that career in engineering to then becoming a coach? Because, as I said to Becki before we started this interview, for me, as someone who has worked with engineering organisations but never actually worked in engineering myself, I see engineering as very process-driven, very task, very focused, whereas coaching obviously is about people and the more human side of skills. So I'm interested as to why Becki went into engineering in the first place, and how her interest was piqued there, but then how she is now in the coaching space. So I guess that's my first question to you, Becki. What made you decide on engineering? What was it?
Do you know, Faye, I actually fell into engineering more than it being a conscious decision. I can remember being at school, and when would it have been? It would have been in my first year of sixth form. I did really well in my GCSEs, and so like anyone who, or back then, we're going back a little bit. If you did well at school, you then went on to either college or sixth form, and I did at sixth form. This is how much I was not planning on a career in engineering. At sixth form, the subjects that I chose were RE, history, Spanish, and sociology.
Oh, wow.
So nothing even maths based, nothing scientific. And going to a career fair, and there was a stand from an engineering company, and I got talking to them, and then I got talking later to my sister, I think it was, and saying, I'm just not sure I want to go to uni. I'm just not sure that's for me. And we'd been talking about other options, and one of their friends was an electrician. I thought, well, that sounds quite good, getting a trade behind me, so that I could do my training, and then, if I chose to, I could go and work for myself. And so I originally applied to be an electrician. And when I went for the interview, the people who were interviewing me said, really happy for you to go on and be an electrician, but with the grades that you've got, you would more than qualify for the engineering apprenticeship that we offer. And I was like, well, I don't really know what an engineer is. Like, what's the difference between what the electrician does and an engineer does? And so they told me, and I thought, oh, well, actually, okay, that sounds more interesting then. Yeah, I'll do that. And much to the dismay of many of my teachers, back then apprenticeships were, I think they're a bit more popular now. I think they're seen as quite a sensible route for people. But back then, it was very much you only did an apprenticeship if you weren't capable of going to university, which wasn't the case for me. So I can, I've still got very vivid memories of teachers trying to talk me out of going down this apprenticeship route into engineering. But I did. And so, September 2005, September the 5th, 2005, I can still remember it, was when I started my engineering apprenticeship.
Oh, wow. And what was that like for you? What was the environment like? And how did you feel when you were in the environment that you were in?
Yeah, I think at first, like anyone going into the world of work, it was scary. My first sort of stint there was in the office. I wasn't straight out on site. But there's always things to navigate at, that you're definitely a lot younger. And it quite quickly, I quite quickly started to feel that I was a bit different because I was female, not necessarily in a bad way, but there was a marked difference there. And what I will say, I'll say at this point, as I go through this, when we go through this interview, what I'm talking about will be very much my experience. And I will appreciate that there will be other women in engineering. Some will have had a similar experience to me. Others' experience will be wildly different, whether that's more positive or even more negative. So just to be clear, this is very much my experience of engineering and of being a woman in the engineering sector. But also what didn't help, I think, was that the apprenticeship that I was put on, I think we were only the second or third year that they ran the apprenticeship. So the apprenticeship itself was quite new. So people that I was put with, who were to be my mentors, also didn't quite know what to do with me. There were comments about the fact that I was she's a girl. What do we do with the girl here? But also, what are we doing with the engineering apprentice? Whereas at the time, before this apprenticeship, what generally happened would be that people would go up from the tools. So you would start on a technical apprenticeship and you would work on a skills apprenticeship and you would work your way up and, you work your way up the level until you found yourself in an engineering, office-based role. And, but I can still remember sort of like my first time going onto site and, they would literally down tools to stop. And I was 17 at the time. And in some environments that felt a bit intimidating. Others, it almost felt a bit funny. I seemed to be such a novelty, but it was, it was a novelty for some. And then there were others. There were some people who definitely tried to sort of like, let's stop being silly. She's just a person who's here to do the job. I can still remember one guy that I got put on because a part of my training, I did have to go and do installation. You would not want me to come and plumb your house in any way, shape or form, but through the training, I did have to learn how to actually do it on the tools because, of course, if I'm going to be managing these people, I need to understand their job. I needed to understand the work that they actually did. And I can still remember, one guy, I won't say his full name, but Mick, who he had me carrying some pipe up the stairs. And as he'd walk through, people would stop and they would be looking. He said, well, what do you think of my new lad? Isn't he doing well? And someone pulled him to one side and said, you can't say things like that. She'll have you in at HR if you're talking about being a new lad. And he said, I've been working with her for the last 2 weeks. She's got a cracking sense of humour. No, she won't. I know this girl. We're all right. She's my new lad. I'm not seeing her as being any different to the lads that I normally have as apprentices. And that's why I'm saying it. So, do one. And he was, one of those great examples to me of he didn't see me as any different to anyone else, which was really nice. Really nice.
Did that give you, I was going to say, how were you feeling? Because I think I know how I'd feel. I think I'd feel quite intimidated being in a very male environment, certainly when I was 17, not so much now. But I think in that environment, I'd felt quite intimidated. So did it give you a sense of relief that you'd kind of found your place, or that he was not seeing you as anything different, and that you were part of the team? Or how did it make you feel?
No, it did. It definitely helped that. And what I would say is, in terms of sort of feeling comfortable on different sites. I worked on many, many, many different sites. And a lot of it came down to just the individuals. And I think that even if you were, male on some of the sites with some of the individuals there, you would not have felt comfortable. There were definitely some people who were just generally nicer to work with. Let's just say they were just nicer to work with. But yes, when people didn't see a difference in me, it definitely helped. The thing was, though, I always felt I had a point to prove because I was different. And what I found was that I had to prove myself a lot more than my male colleague. If I got something wrong, it was talked about for a long time. I was incompetent. I was a useless woman. Whereas my male counterparts could get something wrong, and it was just life, because we are human beings and we get things wrong. So it was much less acceptable in some crowds for me to have got things wrong. And there's still some people now that I think I would hope that I would never have had to work with you again, because you made my life miserable. I'm not going to mention names, but for someone, he was from the main contractor. So us as a mechanical and electrical engineering contractor, generally we would be a subcontractor to the principal contractor, who normally would be the builder. And one of the people who worked for the builder, I could not do right. It didn't matter what I did. I could not do right. And that made things really, really hard, really hard. And he did try to sort of complain about me a few times, and my project manager had got involved and went to speak to all the other members of the team. Is there a problem? Is Becki causing a problem? And they'd all said, well, no, we think she's great. There's no issue. But he had a real issue with me. And there was just no getting away from that. And that made that job really, really hard. And similarly on that job, there was also two guys who, they meant well, they were nice, but they had this habit of, if I would walk through the building, they would shout my name, but like constantly. And that wasn't always very comfortable. It announced to everyone that there I was and I was walking through. And someone sort of took me to one side and said, do you have a problem with this? And I said, I really don't like it. And he said, right, I will deal with that. And he did. And I felt, again, very grateful that someone had seen that and recognised that, and then did something about it. Yeah. No, it's funny. And it's funny because then in later years, when I went down to London, that was the first time that I then worked with other female engineers.
Really?
There were more. That we were still very much in the minority, but there were more. And so you didn't quite feel so alone with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, work's such a massive part of our life. A lot of my friends, were, are people that I work with, have worked with. I've enjoyed that camaraderie with women and men. I've worked with probably quite an even amount of men and women, and I enjoy working with men. I enjoy working with women. Yeah, and we've had a great time. So how did that fit with you? What were your work friends like? And did you get involved with people outside of work in terms of friendships and that kind of thing?
Very rarely. We would go out for drinks and things, and I was never sort of excluded from that. Often it'd be me organising them, to be honest.
Yeah.
And we'd had trips to the races and that sort of thing. But in terms of them friendships outside of work, not so much. And I think that comes down to the fact that it was mainly men. And so there's only so far that those friendships went, really. But in terms of the women, I got my relationships with the women really, really wrong. And there were some of the women at work that I think I could have been good friends with had I approached them differently. And I'm happy to expand on that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what
I mean in that is I saw them as my competition instead of my allies. And that was very much fed from my own insecurities in all the things. I felt like I'd spent years trying to prove myself being capable, as capable as my male colleagues. And now here was another woman. And what if she was better than me? Yeah. Or she's prettier than me, or she's funnier than me, or all the things. I was very, very insecure. And so that definitely affected the way that I approached my female colleagues.
So it sounds like your environment fed that insecurity.
Yeah, it probably did. And looking back, I so wish I'd tackled that differently. I so wish that I had been secure enough to see them as my allies in this world where, there's only a few of us. And then the ones I was very lucky. I worked on Farringdon Station as part of the Crossrail team.
Oh yeah.
And which is a really, it's a huge feat of engineering, Crossrail. It was fantastic, and really, I felt really privileged to be part of it. It was a difficult project, there's no doubt about it, but I was very inspired by the fact that the overall project managers, there were two of them. One went on maternity leave, which tells you she was a woman, and she was running the site. And then the next woman, the next person that came in to run the site was also a woman. And I was completely awestruck by that, that the person right at the top of this enormous site was a woman. And then I kind of put them on a pedestal, though.
Yes, I can imagine that you did.
Yeah, and they and where they were was just outstanding and unachievable for someone like me, who's just a normal woman. But yeah, that was really nice to see women in that position.
And did you have a relationship with them while you were working?
Not so much, purely because of my position, sort of, shall we say, as we go, down the ranks. I don't get me wrong. Definitely was involved with meetings with them, and had no issue speaking to them. When they were very approachable people. If you saw them around the site or around the the offices, very, very lovely women. But no, sort of there were many layers down, both in terms of companies and then within my company, if that makes sense, before it got to me. As much as I was running a part of the job, I was under another senior project manager. So yes, my involvement with them wasn't huge.
So what were your career plans at that time?
I'd always said, I mean, okay, I'll start at the beginning. When I first started, I was going to be the first female member of the board for the company that I worked at. That was my career plan.
Yeah.
So I shot for the top there. But then I got pipped to the post, a long way pipped, not quite right, by someone who was then, HR director, who then became first female member of the board of this company. So that kind of plan had gone. And as I had sort of, spent a bit more time, I thought, I'm not entirely sure I want to aim that far. I'd always said then after that, well, I'll just aim as far as I feel, and I've not explained that very well. I will keep going until I no longer want to rise anymore. So when I feel like I'm in a position where I'm working at my full capacity, I feel energized, and I don't feel like I'm wanting more. Well, at that point, I'll stop trying to rise. Lots of things changed that. Having a family changed that. And so I never rose, terribly up through the ranks, although, no, I mean, obviously I did have a number of promotions. There were times when I was leading the whole job. So on some smaller projects, they were mine. And so I led the whole team on there. And then as I started to work on bigger projects, I was leading a smaller team as part of the huger overall team, if that makes sense. But I stopped. I got to the point where I stopped wanting to go any further, but neither was I happy and feeling like I was working at my full potential. And that was when alarm bells started ringing for me around, hang on, what am I actually wanting to do with my career now?
And why do you think that was?
Construction, and the engineering that I did was part of construction. I worked on different building sites. It's a difficult environment to work with, and I just got fed up with working for people who managed people by bullying, by belittling, by glorifying overworking and, being overwhelmed and being close to burnout, and who, just didn't seem to understand people and what to actually do to motivate people in a positive way. I mean, I'll give an example, Faye. On the last project that I worked on, the person who ran it from the main contractor, in my opinion, was a bully. And he took great delight in giving people a real dressing down, and arrogant to the point of, actually, I just found it unbelievable. So an example, personal protective equipment, PPE, really important on sites, really important. And part of general PPE will be the wearing of glasses and gloves. And he had come across a contractor who had not been wearing their gloves when they'd done a task. Because he had the power to do so, he pulled the entire team from that company off of the site. He locked their access so that they couldn't no longer access site, and had made their director go down and apologise to him. Couldn't just do it on the phone. It wasn't a phone call. The director had to come to site and apologise. And the director came to site and he left him waiting for 4 hours. Such was the arrogance of the man. That was, but then no one did anything to challenge the behaviour of this man.
What was done about that? 4 hours?
Absolutely nothing. And it wasn't just one contractor that he did it with. He did it with multiple. And he was well known for it. And then what he would do, if he found someone who wasn't wearing their PPE, you always have what's called a morning briefing, and you go through right, we are all working in this area together. These are the tasks that we're doing. We've got this area cordoned off. Please don't come through the barriers. Because of the size of the site, there could be a couple of hundred people in each area. And he would have them go and stand at the front and apologise to their workers, to their workmates, for the fact that they weren't wearing their PPE, or they'd done something that wasn't in line with their method statement. Just total belittling, little school kids standing at the front and apologising. And it created such a bad feeling, and but he was known for it. And I've pulled this guy out. He's certainly not the only one. He's not the only one by a long shot who led like this. In fact, on every site that I worked on, I could think of an individual who thought that the best way to motivate people was to shout at them and to threaten violence, or to threaten them with, that they get sacked or whatever. And that was the only way to motivate people. And I just got so fed up. And I looked at my colleagues from the company that I worked with, who I had a lot of time and respect for, who were completely overworked, didn't know how to deal with people who just wanted to bully and belittle. And I thought, I do not want to turn into you. This doesn't pay well enough for it to do, for it to affect my mental health and my physical health the way that I see it affecting you.
Sure. So it sounds like that was the start of something quite different for you, Becki.
It was, and it was like a lot of people, my final cook, my final cook.
Who?
I don't even know what word I was trying to go for there, Faye. The final, the final push would be better. Yes. Would be the events of 2020 and COVID. So very early on in 2020, I had an operation, which meant I was off work for 8 weeks. I was back for 2 days before everything shut down, and I got furloughed. And so in that furlough time, as much as I was trying to homeschool, so my children at that point were 5 and 2. So I was homeschooling one and trying to, keep a very lively toddler interested with, not being able to go to the park or, for a drive anywhere or all that kind of stuff. But it also gave me that thinking time. Okay, if I'm gonna make a change, what am I gonna do? And I'd always liked the idea of coaching. I first came across coaching doing a leadership and management diploma, and I'll be quite honest with you, Faye, I was terrible at it, because what I wanted to do when we were doing the coaching practice was to fix everyone's problems for them, because I knew best. I was very much at that point. I still had a point to prove, that I was very clever and very experienced, even though maybe I wasn't quite so experienced. But I didn't want you to know that, and so I will solve your problems for you, which, as we know, is not what coaching is about at all. And then it got to the point where my company had sort of said, right, redundancies are coming. If there's anybody who wants to volunteer, then great. Otherwise, we'll start the full process. And I raised my hand at that point. I thought, this is the perfect chance to get out. So I took voluntary redundancy. I retrained as a coach, and always with now my mission for my business is to create the happiest leaders. Because I look at the way that I was led in my working life. And I want better. I want better for the future generations, because otherwise, Faye, all that was happening is they see the behaviours of these people who shout and scream and belittle and bully. And that's what people start to emulate, because that's what's working.
That's what they know. Yeah.
That's what they know.
Yeah.
That is what they know. And these people at the top, they know better. They've been on all the courses, but they're the people who are sat there, answering emails through the courses or going out and taking phone calls. And as far as I'm concerned, those people at the top had their chance to do better. They had it. But that just because they didn't choose it and didn't take it doesn't mean that the people coming up can't do better. But if you don't know that there's another way to do things, then you're never going to do it, are you? You follow what you see. We know that. And so that is why I choose to focus on the future and emerging leaders, because I want them to develop the self-awareness and emotional intelligence to know that there is a better way to lead people.
Yeah, and there's absolutely a better way to lead people, Becki. I've seen it. I know you've seen it, and it works so beautifully when it happens. But there will, I've also seen some, there's bully tactics. I've seen it in my own organisations, and I've been working with other organisations throughout my life, and I've seen it there as well. But when it works brilliantly. So we're both on that same, I'm going to use your business terminology, that quest. We're both on that same quest to be developing people so that they are leading their business, their people, their lives in that positive, happy way to get things done, in a way where it works for everybody.
Yeah.
But that's such an interesting journey, and what surprised me, because I don't think I realised just how quickly, I knew you'd taken voluntary redundancy, but I didn't realise just how quickly things happened for you, actually, that you kind of made that decision and boom, there you were, just very, very different. So last year was a bit dramatic for you all round, really.
It was. And and I'll be completely honest, I've definitely felt like I've been flying by the seat of my pants for a lot of it. But in a lot of ways, I think I work quite well like that. I think that when I look back and think, if I'd have tried to do coach training alongside my normal job, I know I wouldn't have done it, because I was working such long hours. I was so stressed, very overwhelmed, that I would never have done it any other way. And so it was kind of an all or nothing thing. Because I did think, well, maybe I don't take the voluntary redundancy. I may not get made redundant and I could retrain and go back. But the thought of going back, it actually made me feel ill. And I've never felt like that. I've never found myself in that situation. And as I say, I've worked on some really difficult projects, but, it's, I don't know, you get through it. You get through it, and you always learn things because of it. But I just felt like I just don't feel like I have the energy to pull myself through this one. So I'm going to have to go all or nothing. Yeah. And so that's it. Lifeline of a regular income, of a career that I'd built over 15 years. So it was a nice regular income. Gone. And it's funny because I just wanted to coach, Faye. That's, I just wanted to coach. I just wanted to coach people. And it wasn't until I was talking to someone who we both trained with, the very lovely Katie Murray, who had said to me, she'd had a conversation with someone who said, that's great, but coaching's a skill, not a business. And that's when the penny dropped. If I wanted to coach, I needed to learn how to run a business as well. Yeah. Oh. And I'm still very much on the learning curve there. The coaching part I love, and I find it so satisfying. I'm going to say I find it easy. I make sure that I practice a lot, and I do a lot of work on myself to try and make that coaching easy for me. The business part, still working on that.
Yeah, I think most coaches would agree with you. Yeah, we as coaches, I think when you do coach, and you coach as your profession, then you love that part of it, because that's where we are, that's where we sit. But yeah, I know what you mean about the business. Yeah, and I'm however many years in, 6 years in. Yeah, and it. Yeah, some things get easier. That's probably a podcast for another day.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
So wow, so it really was your experiences, what you'd experienced, and what you'd seen that made you, and the circumstance of the time that made you decide to change. So actually, maybe COVID was. Do you see it as a blessing? It gave you new opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. No, COVID. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. COVID was tough. Like everyone else, we didn't get off. We didn't come out of it unscathed. But it definitely gave us some really great opportunities. And so I have to be grateful for that. And I'm glad to be grateful for that as well, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do know what you mean.
And yeah, it was an opportunity, and it's an opportunity that I've taken and I've grabbed with both hands, and I'm working every day to try and make sure that it was a worthwhile jump.
Yeah.
Because it is, it's hugely different. And also, getting into that engineering, and construction market can be difficult, because as you started with it at the beginning by saying, it is very process driven. And that term soft skills, which I absolutely hate, I very much call those human skills. They are seen as soft, as feminine, as not something for us to work at, because we don't need to, because it's all right. We can just shout. And I must say there, whilst there were some definite people that I would never want to work with again, most of my own leaders had some really great redeeming qualities. Most of them didn't get it right all the time, but who does? We are all human. But they all had aspects of greatness. And so I really must say that, and not just make out that everyone that I worked with was awful.
Yeah.
They really, really weren't. And some in particular, I will be forever grateful for the fact that I worked with those people and the things that I learned from them and the way that they supported me. But most of them could have done better. And that's what I want. That is what I want for the next generation of leaders. I want them to know that there is a better way to do things and that they can do that.
Brilliant. I love it. Becki, thank you so much for sharing your story with our listeners, but me as well, because I've heard stuff. You and I, we've been friends for a while now, and I've heard a lot of your story, but not all of it. So it's really lovely to sit and listen to that and understand where you've come from and what brings you to coaching and what you want to aspire to through your business, which is doing those great things. You and I have quite different stories of how we've come to where we are today, and that interests me. Mine is quite different to yours. Probably flip it. So maybe that's a story for another day.
Definitely. I can be interviewer, Faye.
You could,
and not interview me.
You could interview me if you want to.
That would be wonderful. No, thank you. No, and actually, I really appreciate this the opportunity and the platform that we have for sharing my story. So thank you for suggesting this. It did make me laugh when you first said that I've been watching, about the great engineers of the Victorian era, and it made me think of you. I thought, well, I'm definitely not of that caliber.
Do you know what?
Thanks anyway.
No, you're welcome. Do you know what though? What can you imagine the conditions, the working conditions, the leadership? No. I wonder what Isambard Kingdom Brunel's leadership style was like, or Thomas Telford, Abraham Darby. The greats of their day, very visionary. My goodness me, so visionary. I wonder what their leadership style was like. I wonder what the working conditions were like then. I think we've got a good idea. I think we've come a long way.
Yep.
But can you imagine what they would think of coaching? And that's what interests me. That's why I love history. Just as a very quick before we go, the person that you were talking about who was asking your team members, what's Becki like to work with? Are you finding that you have with these problems with Becki? Reminded me of my history teacher at school. My history teacher didn't like me. And my history teacher went round to all of my other teachers and said, what's Faye like in class? Do you get on with Faye? And I did get on with my teachers, apart from my history teacher. Wow. I was sitting there listening to you thinking, I'm amazed, and I am amazed at how much I love history today. It was no thanks to that teacher who I had for 2 years on the run. But
wow, you did well to come through that. With a love of history, absolutely.
And on that note, we'll call it a day. But thanks for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Meet Me on the M53. If you'd like to know more, you can see Becki at questforest.co.uk and Faye at fayeblakey.com.
Don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss an episode, and thank you to Wahhoo Media for our production. We'll see you next time on the M53.
Safe travels.